Summary of the Browning version by Terence Rattigan. The Browning version starts in the living room of a large, cheery, if a little dark and gloomy, flat. It is where Andrew Crocker Harris and his bitter wife, Millie, live because Andrew works at a public school for boys in the south of England and the school gives them a place to live. Today is the last day of school, and it's between 6 and 7 p.m. in July. Andrew's health is not good, so today is also his last day as a classics teacher at the school. His doctor has told him to find a less demanding job elsewhere. John Taplow, a 16-year-old student, walks into the room and yells "Sir" at his teacher, Andrew. He nervously opens the door and takes a piece of chocolate from a box he sees on the table. Taplow grabs a walking stick and starts working on his golf game. Just then, one of the school's younger and more famous teachers, Frank Turner, walks in. He gives Taplow tips on how to improve his swing, and the two of them start talking. Taplow tells Frank that Andrew has asked him to do extra work because he missed a day of work last week because he had the flu. He also tells Frank that he wants to switch to Frank's science class in the new school year, but is waiting for Mr. Crocker Harris's permission to remove. If it were any other teacher than the Croc, the permission would have already been given. Taplow does a funny version of Andrew and says the exact words his teacher says on the remove: "My dear Taplow, I have given you exactly what you deserve. No less, and no more, for sure." Taplow repeats his impression when Frank asks him to, but neither of them knows that Millie just walked into the room. After saying hello to Frank, Millie sends Taplow to the pharmacy to pick up Andrew's heart medicine. Taplow asks Frank as he leaves the room not to let Millie tell Andrew about his impersonation. Now that Taplow is gone, it's clear that Frank and Millie are having an affair, though Millie seems more serious about it. They agree to meet up in Bradford in September, but Frank seems hesitant. Millie kisses Frank and tells him she loves him. Frank is worried about Andrew coming back, though. Millie tells Frank that she heard Taplow imitating Andrew and that she thinks it was very naughty of Frank to support him. Frank admits that he is too friendly with the boys at school, but he says that it was either that or the petty, soulless tyranny that Andrew uses to keep order. He also says that Andrew never should have become a teacher. Millie says that Andrew used to be passionate about his vocation and even wanted to be a teacher one day, but he lost that drive along the way. Millie changes the subject and asks Frank why he didn't sit with her and Andrew at the recent cricket match at school, but instead chose to sit with one of the other schoolmaster's wives. He says he didn't do it and that he completely forgot. She says that he should act like he loves the fact that she loves him, even though she knows he doesn't love her. She adds, half-jokingly, that she'll kill herself if Frank doesn't come to Bradford in September. Andrew walks through the door to get inside. After a short talk in which he said he was a little annoyed that Millie sent Taplow away instead of having the medication brought to him, he greeted Frank. He shows Frank the new schedule he made for the next term. This is something he has done every year for as long as he has worked at the school. When Taplow comes back, Frank has to leave so that Andrew can start his lesson. Millie also leaves to make dinner in the kitchen. Andrew and Taplow go to the table and sit down. Taplow has to work hard to read out loud lines from the Agamemnon, a Greek play by Aeschylus. While he does this, Andrew often jumps in to fix Taplow. Taplow gets an idea to make one of the lines more dramatic and gory. The line in question describes the time right after Clytemnestra has killed her husband, Agamemnon. Andrew scolds his student for adding words to a line that weren't there before. The student suddenly seems thoughtful and emotional. He tells Taplow that when he was young, he worked very hard on his own version of the Agamemnon. The result was a text that was maybe even more beautiful than the original, but it was never published. Dr. Frobisher, the director of the school, walks in during the lesson and sends Taplow home. Even though Dr. Frobisher seems nice and friendly, he has two bad things to tell Andrew. First, the school officials won't give Andrew his pension because he isn't quite old enough to retire, even though they made an exception for a similar case not long ago. Second, Dr. Frobisher wants to change the order of the speakers at the end-of-term event. Normally, a teacher with Andrew's experience would be the last headline speaker, but Dr. Frobisher wants to switch the order so that a younger, more popular teacher ends the assembly on a climax. Andrew takes both choices quietly. On his way out, the teacher tells Millie how pretty she is. Now that Millie and Andrew are alone, she asks him about the choice about the pension. She is mad at him because he didn't fight back. She thinks he just sat there and made a joke in Latin. In the middle of her rant, she charges him of wanting to live off her money, which comes from her father's business, and of forgetting that it's the husband's job to take care of his wife. She isn't too upset about the change in the order of speakers at the gathering because Dr. Frobisher had asked her opinion a week before. When Mr. Peter Gilbert and Mrs. Gilbert walk in, they break up this heated conversation. They just got married and have come to see the flat where they will live next year when Peter takes over Andrew's job as a teacher. Mrs. Gilbert asks Millie to show her around. In the meantime, Andrew and Peter are talking, and Peter says that he is worried about being able to keep his students in line. He makes a mistake and lets it slip that Dr. Frobisher calls Andrew the Himmler of the Fifth because he is strict and in charge, like one of the top Nazi leaders. Andrew seems upset about the name, so he tells Peter about his job as a teacher. He says he knew from the start that he didn't have the knack to make people like him, but he did try to show his students his joy in the great literature of the past. Most of the time, he thinks he failed. Even though he knows he isn't liked, he is surprised to find out that he is also feared. He says that his failure is due to a sickness of the soul. He is suddenly ashamed, so he tries to get Peter to act properly again. Millie and Mrs. Gilbert come back in, and the young couple leaves after some awkward goodbyes. Millie walks out of the room. Now that Andrew is on his own, it seems like he is trying hard to keep his feelings inside. Andrew is surprised when Taplow comes back and says he wants to say goodbye to his teacher and wish him luck. He gives him a copy of the Agamemnon translated by Robert Browning as a gift. Andrew doesn't know that the book is written for him. Andrew gives it back to Taplow and tells him that Browning's version might grow on him over time. Taplow says that the book is a gift and that he wrote a note in the front page. Andrew reads the message and is very moved by it. He asks Taplow to get his medicine, and when Taplow comes back, he can't hide how upset he is. Frank walks in, and Andrew shows him what Taplow has written. He translates it as "God from afar looks kindly on a gentle master," which is a quote from the Agamemnon. Andrew's feelings get the best of him once more. Taplow says goodbye and leaves when Frank tells him to. Andrew tells Frank he's sorry for acting like a fool in front of him and Taplow, but Frank understands. Millie is back in the house. When she heard about Taplow's gift, she thought it was an artful way for him to get Andrew to let him remove. She also tells Andrew, with barely hidden joy, that Taplow has impersonated him before. Andrew put the book down and went to his room. Frank tells Millie that their relationship is over because he doesn't like how she treats Andrew. She hits him, but she keeps telling him that everything will be fine when he gets to Bradford. Millie leaves the room when Andrew comes back. Andrew and Frank drink a glass of sherry together. Frank says that Taplow did act like Andrew, but he also showed respect and love for Andrew. Andrew says he doesn't care what Frank or Taplow think of him, so he doesn't care about this information. Frank's last words of advice to Andrew are that he should leave Millie. Andrew asks if Frank wants to make it easier for him to keep seeing her. Frank is shocked to find out that Andrew knows about the secret relationship, but Andrew tells him that Frank is not the first man Millie has had a relationship with behind his back. She tells him everything, in fact. Andrew says that he and Millie were always going to hate each other because their two kinds of love were always incompatible. Andrew says that his earlier signs of feeling were like the muscle twitches of a corpse. Frank says that a dead body can be brought back to life, and he wants to see Andrew at his new school in Dorset in September. Even though Andrew doesn't want to, Frank writes a date on the calendar and, when Millie comes back into the room, makes Andrew tell him the address of the new school. Then, Frank gives Andrew a handshake and leaves. Millie laughs at Andrew because he asked Frank to stay with him, but Andrew says that Frank came up with the idea on his own. Millie wants Frank to stay with her in Bradford instead of going to see Andrew in Dorset. Andrew says that he thinks Frank will probably not go to either of them. Andrew tells Millie over dinner that he won't go to Bradford in the months before he starts his new job. Instead, he will stay at the school where he is now. She tells him not to expect her to come to Dorset, and he tells her that neither of them has the right to expect anything from the other. The phone rings right at that moment. Dr. Frobisher is calling with some questions about the school schedule that Andrew made. Andrew uses the chance to tell Dr. Frobisher that he has changed his mind about the order of speakers in the gathering and insists on speaking last. He ends the talk by saying that, in his opinion, an anticlimax can sometimes be surprisingly good. He hangs up the phone and sits down to dinner with Millie.
About the author. Mr. Terence Mervyn Rattigan was the son of Vera and William Rattigan. He was born just before George V became king. Rattigan's father was a minister, and he hoped that one day his son would work for the government. Rattigan came from an upper-middle-class family and had a typical schooling. He went to Harrow School and then Oxford. After going to the stage as a child, Rattigan became very interested in the art form. At Harrow, he read all of the plays in the school library. Rattigan wanted to be a writer so badly while he was at Oxford that he dropped out to write. Rattigan's play French Without Tears, which came out in 1936, was a hit pretty quickly. Rattigan was a tail gunner in the Royal Air Force during World War II. After the war, he wrote a series of famous and well-received plays, like The Winslow Boy and the Browning version, which solidified his reputation as a major playwright. Not long after that, though, his plays stopped being popular as new, younger writers like the Angry Young Men took over. Rattigan kept working and made plays that are now thought to be some of his best. In 1971, Queen Elizabeth made Rattigan a knight. He was only the fourth writer in the 20th century to get this honor. Rattigan's fame in Britain grew again near the end of his life. He died in Bermuda at the age of 66 from bone cancer.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.